breaking away from the shift kit a little bit, we're going to take the tail shaft of this transmission off. Two reasons I'm doing it. Basically, the first one is to replace this tail shaft gasket. It looks damp, like it's been leaking, and also to pull out the shaft for the rear servo arm. That shaft has two O-rings and they typically leak back here. And this transmission had a lot of fluid in the back area around the pan, so I'm thinking that that's been leaking. We're going to go ahead and take care of those issues. So it'll also give you insight as to how to take it apart. You can do it in the car, it's not too bad. The biggest thing you have to do is support the transmission and basically take out your cross member and remove whatever exhaust and the drive shaft out of the way. So we'll get started on this. We'll take out the speedometer housing, speedometer gear housing. It's got an O-ring behind it, or on it, so they stick pretty good. So now with that out of the way, we can get into removing this plate. You can see this plate's got two big Phillips screws here. We'll take this apart. These typically leak a little bit too, so we'll put a new gasket on that along with some silicone. That way that's nice and dry. Pop that open. What this does is it exposes the tail shaft bearing retainer clip. It's a expanding clip with a groove cut in the bearing, so it basically keeps that bearing in place and the tail shaft in place. We'll go ahead and take the bolts out of the tail shaft, and I think there's 2, 3, 4, 6 bolts. We'll get a hammer, and what we're going to do is take the slip yoke off, and we're probably going to get some fluid out of there too, because I tipped this tranny over earlier and there's probably a bunch of fluid behind here. Lucked out, there was not. Set that there. Now that the bolts are all loose, we can give this kind of a crack. Okay, and it's split, so we're good. And now the fun part, we kind of have to fight this. Let's see, what we're going to do is prop this up on a take with a block of wood. Roll it over in the bell housing. There we go. Okay. Okay, we freed the tail shaft from the main body of the transmission, and what we're going to do is take the tail shaft off by pulling towards the drive shaft or towards the rear end while opening up this snap ring. So we'll get that pried open, and they will spring and pop on you. It's a square ring, so it's a kind of a pain in the ass. There we go. And that's how you take them off. Really not all that bad. Just have to fight them a little bit. So this exposes the rear bearing, and you can see the groove on the bearing. That's what the snap ring retains into on the tail shaft. Also, we see the governor set up right in here. That's basically your speed governor for the transmission for hydraulic fluid and shift points. Basically manipulates the transmission hydraulic circuit. So we'll take the rear servo, we'll get this loosened up, and I'll show you right in here where the shaft is. So you can see what I'm talking about now. We're at the back of the transmission, and right in here you'll see that dark spot. That's the shaft for the rear servo. That basically just drives out of there. There's a corresponding tab on the bottom of the tail shaft right here. You'll see it right here sticking down. That basically is the retention for that shaft. So we'll go ahead, we'll loosen up the servo, get the tension off of it, and we'll drive out that shaft and reseal it. Let's get the 11/16 wrench. And the lock nut. And loosen it up. We'll back off the adjustment. And we're just about free. So what we'll do is now we have to get there's a link bar that's inside there, which is a pain in the butt to try and fiddle around with. So what I'm going to do is try and get in there so I can see this bar. What I have to do is collapse the band, or basically crush the band onto the drum, and take the tension off of the servo and try and wiggle that out of there, and a magnet will help that. So what we'll show you is the link bar is down here, and it's kind of difficult to see, but it rides right in here, right under the band. So hopefully we'll be able to show you how it comes out. So you can see you can push the band, tighten it onto the drum. So I'm going to do that, back the adjustment fully off of the arm, hold this, try and push this band down, and get my magnet in there to try and grab that little tab. Sometimes it's easier said than done. Might try it with a little screwdriver first. This one's fighting really difficult. So usually this transmission has only 20,000 miles on it, to be honest with you. So this band is really still tight, I'm gonna guess, because I've never had to fight with one so much. So what we're gonna do is just drive the shaft out and just take this out as an assembly, and spare the fucking around, I guess you'd say, or the messing around. Okay, what I did was I had to remove the front band link arm just to give me some extra room so I can get in here. I was able to get a couple drifts to try and pound this shaft out, and once you do, you can start to get it to go. And once you get it past rusty sections, it starts to go pretty easy. So I'll show you on the other side of it coming out. Zoom it in. That's what we're after. So I'll grab the end of it with some channels and just kind of twist and pull. And what we'll have happen is this will come right out of the bore, and you'll see we have an O-ring seal here. Boy, oh boy, is that fight. Take my extension out, and everything loose. It should all just kind of fall apart. Take this middle arm out. You can see we get the pivot arm. So this sits in here like that. And I'll show you this flat link bar sits like that, and then the band sits on the other end of this. So when this pivots, it rocks this whole assembly and basically applies the rear band. Set that down, and we'll just leave it in place. We'll get the shaft out here. Okay, shaft's out. Two reasons I pull this out. You can see all the rust gets built up on here. It eventually gets in and works in here to this O-ring, and just this O-ring gets dried out with time and shrinks. So what we're going to do is replace this O-ring, clean it all, and then put it in with silicone at the end of it. So the silicone will have a nice clean surface to bite on. We're not trying to fight all that rust and transmission fluid. Another part of the shift kit is to remove this rear servo. And what we need to do is replace the spring that's in there and also put in a spacer. There's two different styles. One takes a spacer, one does not. So we'll see what we have. There's a spring behind this cup here. So we're going to push the cup down with our hands and get in here and pull this retainer spring out towards us. It gives you a nice, they give you a nice tab here to get a little screwdriver onto right in there. So you work that around. So once you get it started, just kind of keep tension on the cup and it pops out. So pull this retainer out and pull our spring, and we'll also get the servo piston out of here. Try and catch all this fluid. Hopefully it don't go everywhere, but onto the tray. Now, per the TransGo instructions, this rear piston will get disassembled. There's a snap ring in here, so we have to put this in a vise, compress this spring, remove that retainer, and there's a spacer that goes on that shaft to keep this from basically crushing down when we apply hydraulic pressure. It's a pretty heavy spring, so I'll show you how to do this in the vise. Okay, so we're going to get this rear servo piston separated. I already have my expanding pliers for my snap ring set up to expand this, so I'll show you like that. Okay. Take two sockets, usually helpful if you got deep ones. We'll set the piston right against the back of the vise, and we'll set the sockets on each side of the top piston, the big piston, about centered. And what we'll be able to do is then compress that piston. You see that move on that shaft? All we're doing is trying to take the tension off the retainer. We're not trying to compress that spring all the way. So we'll open up that spring, or that clip, and try and get that off of there. And you can kind of back off the vise to help you get it off, and keep your thumb over it because it will probably snap and fly away, as most of the time they usually do. Okay, so now that that's out, you can back the spring tension off of it, and now it's separate. So the retainer is out. We pull this piston off, and now you can see that we have the piston, the spring, and this shaft. Now all we're doing is we're reusing the spring and installing basically a block spacer. So this will go onto the shaft like so. We'll put the spring back, put the piston back on, recompress it, and they do give you a new snap ring to put it back together with. So get it set up on the vise the same way. Like I said, we don't have to try to compress it all the way, we just want to get that snap ring in there. That's it. Release it. We're good to go. Also included with the shift kit, you can see the new spring. It's quite a bit heavier than the old one, the original one. So set that aside. Put the new one in. And we have to put our retainer in the same way. Hard part is recompressing this by yourself, holding it, and getting the snap ring back in. So I'll videotape myself fighting it, and you can watch it as for your own enjoyment. See if we can do something. Okay. Was able to find a couple washers. Throw those on top. Put the snap ring in there. And let's see if we can squeeze it down with this C-clamp. Or this big vice grip C-clamp. Oh, look at that. Piece of cake. The only thing we have to do is just kind of keep a hand on it so in case it does explode, it doesn't hit my face. Okay, snap ring popped in. Look at that. Perfect. Like it was meant to be. Okay, so I ran a rag through the hole where this pivot shaft goes through. And what we're going to do is get the parts a quick wipe off and put it back together. I put a new O-ring on the shaft as well as polishing the shaft at the very tip where it had all that rust. So I'll show you that in a second. Just get this wiped down. Okay. So we've got the pivot. Let's get this arm in here. And the link. So set the link down. See if we can get that all in there as one. Okay. So with that all together, so I polish the surface here and the top, so we have a nice clean surface. And we'll drive this back in position. Also have a new O-ring on the end. And we'll just start tapping it in and trying to realign the holes. Okay, so we're up against the upper link bar here. So just kind of tap on it, wiggling all around. Try and hold it there. Okay, there it goes. Through the other half of that arm. And we should be coming into the case. And we are. So just drive it in. See that pin right there? We're just going to drive it all the way home. Just get a punch or an extension, however you want to drive it in. We've got the O-ring started there, so we'll just drive it till it bottoms out. And you can kind of hear the change in the thud. So you know you're in. That's it. So the new O-rings on that shaft, what I'm going to do is, before we get this tail shaft gasket torn off, or before we put the tail shaft back on, we're going to clean this gasket surface. We're also going to wash that out with some lacquer thinner, and then I'll seal that up with some silicone, and we shouldn't have any more leaks. Okay, another piece you want to take out and get moving freely is this front servo or front band adjustment bolt. What we're going to do is, this one was frozen up pretty bad, so I had to heat it up and get this nut free. Started a couple threads in the end, put it back in the case, and put the front band together. And before you go and do the final adjustment, we'll put some sealant on this thread, so that way it seals the threads to the case, so you don't have a potential leak through this bolt either. So I'll get that put in. And we'll get the link set there. Drop that in and get the little tab. It's a 5/16 square shaft at the top and a 3/4 nut. Per the shift kit instructions, we have to adjust the front band snug with a short wrench and then back it off 2 turns. So what we'll do is adjust this shaft down. Which will tighten the band on the drum. I'll snug it. Nothing crazy, just snug. Got a short 5/16 wrench. You can see this band is applied, and what I'll do is I'll indicate the hex or the square shaft and back it off 1, 2 full turns. Then I'll go ahead and adjust the jam nut once I get some thread sealant. Just going to use some of this ultra gray silicone, run it in the threads. Then we can tighten our jam nut. And you want to hold the bolt itself with the 5/16 wrench while you tighten the jam nut. And that's it. So the front band is adjusted, and we'll adjust the rear band next. So the rear band is adjusted the same fashion. What we're going to do is run the adjustment nut down, the adjustment shaft I should say down. We're going to grab our 11/16 wrench, hold that nut from turning. Okay. Adjust this snug. You can see it's applying the band, and I've got tension on it now. So band in place. This is a single wrap band, so we're going to back it off 2.5 turns from snug. So I'm going to say right there, still got a little play. I'm going to just go snug right about there. And what I'll do is just kind of keep an eye on it and back it off 2.5 turns. So we got half, 1, half, 2, 2.5. And you'll see we'll have our slot back on there. Run the nut back down. And we'll hold that shaft in place and snug the jam nut. Okay, so the front and rear bands are adjusted, and we're ready to put the valve body back in and put the tail shaft back on. Okay, one of the last things to do is to get this orifice plug from the shift kit. This plug right here, it's got a small hole in it. we got to put it into this oil hole just above the bolt here. So we get a 5/16 bolt, and we'll just drive it in. So putting this thing back together, we're going to put the valve body back in, but we're going to put the accumulator back in. I'm going to use a blocker rod. This just gets rid of the spring, and we're going to put this back inside here. And we'll get the valve body in. We'll line up the park dog. Get that in there first. Sometimes you have to rotate the tail shaft so you can get the park dog in there. The new filter is a mesh screen type filter, and it'll just go back in the original spot. So the last thing to go on is the training pan with a new gasket, and I typically put them on dry.